Students, in this part of the lecture, will discuss a model that is used to implement security in the operating system for the file system. Suppose this is a system and it's a multi-user system. There are n number of users. Suppose this is user 1 and suppose this is user 2. Then after the successful login into the system, suppose uh, this is a system, and after a successful login where there will be authentication process that is used for the user or the user authentication. So once the authentication is successful, the user can gain access of the system. Fine. So where the user can access a number of hosts or can be granted permission to the number of applications. So this model is generally not sufficient for a system that includes sensitive data as it is in case of the database. So this model or this mechanism is not sufficient for a system having sensitive data as in case of the database system. So what could be done? A method or a procedure that is known as user access control procedure. User access control procedure can be used to identify the users in the system, and there will be association with each user of a profile. That is, for every user, suppose this is the user 1. So user 1 will have a profile that specifies, so this profile will specify, so there is a profile associated with every user under the user access control procedure. So the system may have n number of users, and every user will have a profile. The profile that specify permissible operations and file access. That is specify permissible operations and file access and file access. The operating system can then enforce a rule based on the user profile. The operating system can enforce rules based on rules that are based on the user profile. A general model of access control a general model of access control procedure access control as exercised by a file or the database management system A journal model that can be used or exercised by a file system or a database management system is known as is access matrix. So what is access matrix? Access matrix is nothing but a model that is used to enforce or that is used to implement access control procedure. It may be used in the database management system or it may be used in operating system for the file system security. Now coming to the structure of this access matrix. Structure of this model or access matrix. But before discussing the structure, three types of components are or elements are involved in this access matrix. So these are the elements. The first element is known as the subject. The second element of access matrix is the object. And third element of the access matrix is access rights. So these are the elements of access matrix. Subject is what? Subject is an entity capable of accessing the objects. So what is subject? Entity that is capable of accessing the objects. So generally the users or applications are the subject because users can access the different objects or the application also can access the different objects. So the any entity that is capable of accessing the objects will be known as subject in case of the in context of the access matrix. Now coming to the objects. Objects are anything to which the access is to be controlled. Access is to be controlled or whose access is to be controlled. So objects are all those entities whose access by the user or by the applications are required to be controlled. For example, file, programs, memory, printer, etc. So these will be known as objects because their access is required to be their access by user or other applications or by subject is required to be controlled. Now coming to the access rights. Access right is the way in which an object is accessed by a subject is a way in which an object is accessed by the subject. Now discussing these three elements once again. So what is the access matrix? Access matrix is nothing but a model uh, that is used to implement the access control procedure, and this could be in case of the database management system, or it could be in the file system inside the operating system. The access matrix is having three main elements. The first element is known as subject, the second element is known as object, whereas the third element is known as access rights. Subject is any entity that is capable to access the object, that is called as subject. So for example, user is subject, or application programs are the subject. Now coming to the second element, which is object. Object is the entity whose access by the subject is to be controlled or is to be managed. For example, files, programs, memory, printer, and etc. Now coming to the third element, which is access right, is a way or the order in which an object is accessed by the subject. For example, read, write, execute, or print, copy, or so on. Basically, these are the operations that can be applied on the object. Now coming to the structure of the access matrix. The access matrix is a matrix in which the rows represents the subject. So row 1, this is row 2, and row 3. So row 1 is for user 1. This is first user. Say this is user 2 and user n. A system may have n number of users, whereas the column represents the object. So these are subject. The subject could be the user or application programs, whereas the column represents the object. Suppose this is file 1, the second column is file 2. I'm repeating, the object could be a file, it could be a program, it could be memory, it could be printer, or etc. Now suppose this is file 3 and this is printer. So we are assuming that in our system we have 3 files and 1 printer. So the rows are representing the subject, whereas the columns are representing the object. So each column for every one object. Now the entries in the particular shell is representing the access rights, like user 1 on the file 1 is the owner of the file 1, can read the file 1 and can write to the file 1. So the entries inside the shell is known as access rights. Access right. Similarly, the user 2 can read the file 1, can read only, user n or the nth user, this user can read or write the file 1. This is for the example purpose only. Now coming to the another example, user 2 is owner of file 2 and can read and write to file 2, whereas the third user or the nth user can read this file. User 1 doesn't have any right on the file 2, it's not given. Is owner of the file 3, can read and can write the file 3. User 2 can write to the file 3, whereas the user 2 can print it, can use the printer. Print means can use the printer, whereas user 1 is not allowed to use the printer and user n is not allowed to use the printer. So it's a general structure of the access matrix. Hope this is clear to you. But in practice, it's a model, but in practice, this access matrix is usually a sparse matrix. Sparse matrix. Sparse matrix means most of the entries or most of the cells are free. Most of the cells are free. That is, no entry is mentioned there. So these type of matrices are called as sparse matrix. So in practice, it is found that the access matrix is sparse in itself. So now you may have a question how to implement this sparse matrix, how to implement it, how to implement it, because the memory is a concern in itself. So here we have, or we can implement this sparse matrix in two different ways. So let me create a space here. Now the question is how to implement it. And the solution is, the answer is, we have two ways. Either we can use access control list. This is the first way we can implement the access matrix. Access control list. The first way to implement the access matrix, and the second is capability list. Capability list. So these are two different ways that can be used to implement the access matrix. So we will not implement, we will not implement this access matrix as a two-dimensional array or a matrix in the computer, because it's a sparse in itself. So we should have an alternative method. And here two methods are given. The first is access control list and the second is capability list. In the next part, we will discuss these two methods one by one.